Aloha Kamea. Thank you for inviting me. I am a Hakka of Chinese origin and also Native Hawaiian. And my people are people who have traveled great distances throughout their lives. The Native Hawaiians came up to the Hawaiian Islands from the South Pacific about the year 400. That's 2,600 miles by open ocean. And the Hakka are really nomadic people of vast expanses of China. And so they would travel hundreds, if not thousands of miles within their life, moving from one place to another. And this part about being not only of a place, but also traveling across great distance and holding all of that, not as being separate from each other. I believe that has really shaped me. That and living on an island for the entirety of my life.
Thank you so much. I know something that has been notable about your journey is that you started your political life around the same time as your Zen training. And I think oftentimes the spiritual and the political are viewed as separate worlds. So I'm curious, throughout your deep involvement and practice within both of that, maybe starting with the political space, but what did you notice in the political space through the lens of your spiritual practice and journey? Like, what did that sort of reveal to you?
Since I did both at the same time, I'm not sure if I could separate the two. And meaning by that is that I was not very long into my political life, and so I couldn't say there was one part of my political life before my spiritual practice and one part after, right? There might have been a sharper juxtaposition in that. But I did notice that there would be times in which my colleagues might find a decision difficult and I would not. And I would not because I would say that my practice on a daily basis would keep me significantly grounded. And grounded not in a way in which I would be stuck, but in which I would be always connected even if the terrain changes. Right? And this to me is like a hallmark of any type of change work that you might do, whether it be in politics or not, which is to be true to that which is needed and to understand that the terrain changes all the time, sometimes even within a single day. Does that throw you off course? Or is your purpose really clear? Are your values very clear? But are they not like stuck in like concrete, right? And so that whole way of being, it's about your beingness. To me, can be about being a carpenter or a sales clerk or a politician.
So you noticed a difference in terms of your capacity to stay present with possible chaotic terrains or whatever your field of activism or work brought to you, like a greater capacity to stay with things rather than being maybe derailed or distracted or
or distraught, right? Or distraught, right? Like, to be in a situation where you can't figure out what to do, right? Or that you feel emotionally thrown off, which doesn't mean that you are flat in your emotion, right? It's just that you can navigate your emotion and not have your emotion be the single thing in which decisions are made in.
Doesn't that feel kind of extra important during these times? Because it feels like we're at an unprecedented time when the internet world kind of allows us to see all of the global suffering all around the world at the same time, which may not have been true like centuries ago without the internet, where people are just hearing more hyper local or regional stories about traumas and injustices and so forth. So we're having to process everything at once, which already makes the work of staying with everything more difficult, which means we have to even more hone in on these practices to deepen our capacity to stay.
And they can work at odds with each other. Right? Kamea, here's my phone. It's a flip phone. Okay. It's not a smartphone. It's not a smartphone on purpose because I believe that the hyperconnection actually distracts you from being present in whatever needs to be done. And information being what it certainly is always available. The question is it bombarding you? Or you're seeking it out in a way in which it is digestible and useful, right? Or are you just sitting there with everything just hitting you all the time, all at once? And so the juxtaposition, I believe, is that the hyper connectivity actually requires much more discipline if that information is going to be used in wise ways and not just cast us adrift.
It feels like it's important to parse out the difference between staying informed about the state of the world versus staying constantly, quote unquote, connected. Because there are also different ways to stay informed about the world that isn't necessarily dependent on feeding into the distraction economy. And like I've struggled with my relationship with social media because yes, I am learning news, but I'm seeing something for 3 seconds and then I scroll to the next thing. It's another 3 seconds on something totally different. And like, yes, it's helping me to stay informed, but it's not the quality of attention that I want to bring to, I guess, deepening my understanding of these different things. So yeah, that feels important. And I also am curious about kind of reorienting what we center connection on, because being connected in the constant internet world also means being less connected and less present, right, in our rooted day-to-day lives. So I think about people saying like, yeah, I'm going to disconnect for the weekend. And I'm like, I think I'm more curious about like, how do I reconnect with life and my local relationships and local happenings and the news stories of the land and where I am. I'd be curious to hear if you have any other additional invitations or thoughts on the idea of connection and like, how we choose to conceptualize that altogether.
Well, the question is, are we really connecting or are we just absorbing, which is different than connecting, right? Connecting to me is much more of an intimate thing, meaning that we are in relationship with someone or something or some place or some being other than a human, and that in that no other thing is going on at the same time while that is occurring. And we are paying attention and we're listening and we are contributing, but in that we are learning on a mutual basis. So I believe as an Indigenous person that I learn from the land that I am in, and the land also learns from me. Okay. And so therefore, paying attention to that and establishing relationship will truly mean that I could say I'm connected. So could you say that you're connected to, for example, all the various places that information comes from? I would say, I'm not sure whether you actually are connected or whether you're just bombarded by all of those as pieces of data. And those pieces of data, because your mind needs to make sense of it, will tend to quickly categorize it into things that you like and things that you don't like, right? The good and the bad, right? The better and the beautiful, right? The ugly and the short. You quickly categorize these things and then you begin to accumulate those things that you're more attracted to, and you stay away from things that you're not attracted to. Okay, so that whole accumulation is actually at odds with critical thinking or growing wisdom or trying to cultivate understanding or figuring, or even just figuring things out. Even just figuring things out.
Yeah. And this all sounds really foundational to the work of social change and environmental justice, collective liberation, so that we don't end up replicating the crises in how we show up and in the forms of like the solutions that we feed into. Yeah, I already have chills from how I'm feeling my mind stretched by everything you've offered already. So I'm really grateful for that. I kind of want to shift to the other side of things, which is how your political engagement has also informed your spiritual journey. So something you've named that you've learned from your teacher is that if all that someone does is meditate on their cushion, then they might as well just use a stone Buddha. So I'd appreciate it if you can elaborate on what this really is trying to get at, and maybe the idea of the goal of spiritual transcendence not really being about a sort of personal peace that we find for ourselves, but yeah, like being able to connect these often separated worlds instead of seeing spiritual practice as something that's like on its own. And I don't think it's like a neat binary either, but how would you invite us to kind of think about these two things together, especially the spiritual world?
So I am I am most familiar with and in terms of my understanding, but also as well as practice, with the kind of spirituality that helps to illuminate who we are as humans and what is our role and purpose as beings who live on this earth and in this universe. And so, in that regard, there is the aspect about relationship, connectivity, role, and responsibility loom large. Right? And how do you do that in a way in which no being's existence is a matter of the suffering of another being's existence? Okay? So, that kind of spirituality requires you to not only be thinking about it in a in a reflective space, but also to be practicing that on a daily basis. Okay? That's how you not only implement into it, but that's how you figure things out. You make mistakes. You see the many manifestations of how you might justify things or other people might justify things. You figure out in the course of whatever may be occurring in the world at this moment how things are not working and why. Not only at the surface level of the things, the various policy things, but also in terms of the human part. It's like whether we have courage or not, whether we see other people as people or not, whether we are afraid or not, whether we will stand in the face of our fear and still do what is needed in this generation, not by ourselves, but with others? Can we do it with other people, not just as individuals, being righteously good about this or that, right? Or being really smart about this or that? Can we be community in the most expansive set of the words? And can we do that without it being about my community versus your community? So to me, those are like the big questions of humanity. And I don't believe you can live into humanity without spiritual practice of some kind or another. It doesn't have to be one kind or another, but I do believe it needs to be of some kind or another.
And the flip side feels true as well, that people can't really have a deep spiritual practice without tethering that to a sort of understanding of the world and why things are the way they are.
Well, I would say that if you have a deep spiritual practice, well, first of all, there are certain schools that are monastic, right? So in a monastic setting, you are deliberately away from the world in order for certain practices to occur, right? And so those have a purpose within the various practices. I'm not from a monastic order. Okay? So, and also it's true that many people basically, if they are going to go into reclusion, that what they do is they do that for part of their life and not for the entirety of their life, right? So there's various practices. I would say that it is not useful to have your spirituality separate from your life, which is say, oh, I have my secular life and I have my spiritual life. In my spiritual life, I believe these things, but in my secular life, I do these other things. Okay? And you say, well, what's the difference between the two? Well, there are clear differences between the two. And so I keep them entirely separate. Okay? And to me, that would mean you live a split existence, right? A split existence. Okay? But also, it should also be understood that that spirituality is deeply personal, and that there are reasons for that to be the case. You know, throughout my political life, there were only a few people that knew that I was a practicing Rinzai Zen person. Okay? So, and if they did, they knew that as a passing thing without lots of details. I didn't like wear it on my sleeve, go around, do X, Y, and Z. Okay? But how I acted on a daily basis were the same, whether or not they knew it or after it became more public. Right? For some people, they didn't know that any of that happened, was the case, until a wahine, a woman who is a friend, dear friend and colleague who has since passed, Punani Burgess and I were ordained together as Rinzai Zen priests. And at that moment, many people were hugely surprised. And then I got the best compliment that I could get a few years later from someone who saw me on the street as I was running my errand, picking up some things, and they said, you know, Norma, you weren't any different before you were ordained and after you were ordained. You're the same person. And I said, oh, thank you so much. Right? Thank you so much. Right? To not be a not to have your life separated, right, feels very important, especially in these times.
Yeah. Thank you for this. I think a lot of people who are kind of going off of what we were talking about earlier, a lot of people who are trying to keep up with current events and the state of the world, many people are feeling overwhelmed, angry, mentally drained. And I'm in a similar boat as well, trying to process everything while staying attuned to my personal life and my life locally, to tend to my responsibilities with care and to keep showing up with intention. And something that I'm feeling shifted by and still sitting with is your offering of what you call the human quotient. So, to people who have never heard of this framing, how would you introduce what the human quotient is, and how might we understand our place differently through this lens?
So I think of the human quotient as being one of the most important ingredients of where we will go or where we will not go,
Mm.
right? As communities, as peoples, as countries, as global communities. Yeah. That's a those are the characteristics of who it is that we are, not our beliefs, but our characteristics. The characteristics like our courage, characteristics like whether we will choose humanity when we make our decisions. Will we choose not only that which may be expedient in this moment, but that which our descendants may require, may need? Are we paying attention to what is around us, not only what our own individual needs might be? That whole bundle of what you would call what makes us human. And are we paying attention to that? Or are we using humanness as a thing that is either a weakness or an excuse for behaviors that are not human? Right? So I would not say, for example, that violence is inevitable. Say violence arises when we actually set aside humanity and we decide that the way that we're going to resolve things is by power and force that will overcome everything and everybody. And we may do it for righteous reasons, but still life will be taken. Okay? So that human quotient to me is the ingredient that we're not taking into consideration, and also that we're not paying time cultivating.
Mm. One of the practices that you invite in terms of nurturing and growing the human quotient is seeing our breath as a foundational practice. And this can almost feel too simple for the potential impact that it really could have. So I'd love to welcome you to share the reasons why you center this as part of the human quotient and how it can support us to navigate all the overwhelm, grief, and anger that feels so prevalent in these times.
Well, we are a bundle of things. The human being is a bundle of things. We tend to think that we are what we are thinking,
Mm.
right? As that's what we tend to think, especially as adults. You don't find this as much in a child. So a child feeling a particular way, their feeling will be demonstrated in every single part of them. Right?
Mm.
What they say, how they say it, what their body does, whether they're going to stand upright or just curl up in a ball on the ground. And they will have this notion that everything, by the way, is coherent with each other, right? Okay. And an adult might say, oh, don't be so dramatic. Okay. But essentially, as you grow out of your childhood, you are learning things, and among the things you learn are these boundaries around things and how to separate things. Okay? And that might be useful in order for civil society to operate in a particular way. But it's not useful if you essentially are not being able to bring your whole self into anything, your whole self. And as it turns out, your body can sabotage you at any moment. Okay, and here's what I'm talking about. When we get more anxious and that anxiety arises to fear or to anger, and we are at full bloom of that, then there are all kinds of physical things that are happening with your body. You're tensing up, all the muscles are tightening. In different people, a particular part of the body will get tighter than others. For some, it might be your stomach, your shoulders, your jawline. For thinking people, it's often the top part of their body, right? Everything from their chest to the shoulders to the neck. Okay? Even that part that's right in between their eyebrows will just tighten up. Okay? And your breath will become more shallow, and it will be in a higher repetition, meaning that you'll breathe more times per minute. It'll come up into your chest, and it might either hyperventilate or it might be very, very shallow, but breathe very fast. You become unconscious of it, but that breath pattern will keep you in that particular emotional state. And when your emotional state is very high, you begin to lose your executive function, your capacity to be able to think with more alternatives, with more possibility. Your choices narrow, and you get into that place that becomes more and more narrowly binary, where there are only one or two things you can do. And in that state, I would say, you've essentially left a good amount of your humanity behind. Okay? So, the reversing of that, to keep yourself in that place where you have more choices, where your feelings can be fully felt, but they don't take control over everything. Your breath is your most significant tool that you have. And that the breath that is lower in the body, not high in the chest, and slower in its rhythm, with more emphasis on the exhale, a longer exhale, and a shorter inhale. And having that practice on a daily basis with as much discipline as possible allows you, when you're in a tight spot, to have your breath available to you.
So it's not something, it's something that needs to be woven into our daily practice so that when those moments crop up, our bodies, maybe it's like a bodily memory where our bodies know how to shift into that slower gear more easily.
Yes, I think of it as cellular memory, right? So it's not only the part of your body that's breathing, but if you're practicing it, then and you're paying attention, right? You're present, then every part of you, every cell remembers what it feels like to breathe in that way. And then it's not only your mechanical breath that can help you, right? Your body remembers, oh, yeah, relax. I have to actually let go of the tension in that part of my jaw, right? Every part of you conspires to bring you into the better part of who you are.
Beautiful. I love that. Something else that you talk about as a part of growing the human quotient is objectivity as spiritual practice. And when I first hear the word objectivity, the immediate thing that comes to mind is how the concept of objectivity has often been used as a tool to marginalize more relational ways of knowing, to deny our entanglement, to suppress alternative ways of knowing that are different than dominant modes of knowledge production, that are more so deemed like the objective truth, when in fact they actually still arise from particular worldviews and ontologies that aren't universal. So I'm curious how the objectivity as spiritual practice that you talk about is different than what people might think of when they think about the concept of objectivity.
So, objectivity, right, is like a concept that I learned from living on an island with people of multiple cultures and having as the culture that I am closest to being more indigenous than not, right? And so the concepts would come from words like maka'ala, right? Maka'ala, keep your eyes wide open. Right? So don't only feel with your heart, feel with your what you hear, feel with what you taste, feel with what you're smelling as this conversation is going on. Don't only look at the nature of what you are trying to grasp, but everything around it, right? Eyes wide open, right? Your eyes wide open. Okay? And so it's that to not have separation between your thinking mind and your feeling mind. And if you are to feel not only in the place of your heart, but in your gut, right? Way down in your body, right? Instinctually, what is your gut telling you? That your mind may be confused about, or that your heart may be too tied to that which you are emotionally pulled to. Yeah? What is your gut saying? And then how does all of this come together would be the objective place, right? So it's that from that whole place, and also from that place where from time to time, not every day for everything, but from time to time, you have to actually go to a place that is not in the weeds, right? Where you're stuck in the mire of whatever it is you're stuck in, to bring yourself up, at least to the shoreline, if not to the foothills. Just as, for example, if you cannot solve something, you might ask a trusted friend. You might say, friend, what do you think? What are you seeing that I am not seeing? Okay? So practicing objectivity is being that good friend to yourself. To say to yourself, what am I not seeing that if I saw, I might have a better, more clearer picture. I might arrive at the same conclusion. But do I have the whole picture? And many decisions right now require that. It requires that. And it requires that sometimes immediately and sometimes with distance and time. And knowing when that's required immediately or when you should pause is also part of the perceptive skill and wisdom that you need to cultivate.
I really appreciate this invitation because I think there's a lot of talk around how we need to honor more relational ways of seeing the world, to honor our subjective experiences. So it's an invitation to not see these as binaries, as like opposites, but to embrace kind of both, that we can honor our specific lenses and what has shaped us, but also have the humility to take a step back to kind of poke our own lenses and see if there are other ways of looking at the situation. So yeah, I appreciate this sort of both and invitation. And I think part of the challenge that I see in this time is that it kind of requires us to embrace a lot of paradoxes because on the one hand, we have to not desensitize to the state of the world and we do need to feel. And at the same time, we can't, as you say, only run on anger as fuel because that can lead to burnout. And we're kind of being asked to take on this torch of intergenerational work. So I think I want to lean into this a bit more and ask you, like, how do we both not allow ourselves to be desensitized to the pains of other people, to the pains of the earth, while practicing detachment? So yeah, is it a matter of like pendulating between that or like a both and at the same time, or is there a subtle difference between the two? So yeah, how would you speak more to the practice of detachment and not becoming desensitized?
Okay, so there's a great deal of pain that is occurring in the world, and we have great pain because of it. If you don't have great pain, then you should be worried if that's the case. But you cannot hold great pain and act all the time in that pain. So, for people who find themselves needing to do that because of where they live or who they are or what is around them or their role, their job in life, their occupation, their situation and their condition, then you have to take measures, right? You have to be more careful about how you care for yourself and others. You have to not get overextended because a lot of your bandwidth will have to carry that pain. Your energy, the very water that you're made of, will actually leak away. Right? We get dehydrated quickly, literally, physically. Right? Your mind will be muddled because it'll be awash in pain. And so you have to take extra measures in order to be fully functional as the pain requires you. In other words, will we get pulled down into the pain so that we are not going to be able to do that which will alleviate the pain? Right? Will we be agents to make life better for others and for ourselves because of the pain? Or will we be incapable of doing that because we can only react in the pain? Right? To me, it's like what makes the discipline of care possible is that I know the stakes are high. Right? If the stakes are high, then I have to try to cultivate in other people like the full-on usefulness of our ways of being. And what that means is not to build an armor, right? But to actually take on the daily discipline of making sure that I have lots of capacity, right? Making sure that I monitor literally what I eat, how much I sleep, okay? That I don't doom scroll, which is easy because I don't have any scroll to doom, right? That I am not picking up my phone, even if it's a flip phone. I'm not checking my texts or my email, right, immediately in the morning, right? That I carry when I am in extra pain, that I pause, right? I pause. I allow for a metabolizing of it, almost an evaporation of it, so that there is the understanding of that, but that I am not awash in it so much that there is no thing that I am capable of doing or being. Because if I am not able to generate genuine joy, to actually do the things that will heal the harm, then the fact that I'm just awash in suffering and pain does not mean that I have done anything this day to reverse the course of it.
Wow, I think this is the nudge that I needed to practice discipline better, because it feels so easy to just be pulled into all these things that are luring our attention and trying to, you know, yeah, capture our minds, our hearts, to wake up and want to have this urge to reach for the phone, to open the email, the inbox, the social media. That urge is strong. And it does take practice and discipline to kind of rewire a lot of what has become habitual norms for a lot of us. And I think it's difficult when we're trying to change habits and go against all of these things that feel like junk food for our mind, that are kind of formulated to be addicting, and therefore it's going to be even harder. But yeah, I definitely feel inspired from you and the discipline you've cultivated to really bring that into my own life, and to not just be constantly pulled along, because we can make different choices. So yeah, thank you for all of this. I want to bring in also, after the Lahaina fires, I know that you worked as a thought partner to expand the narrative of what's possible. And that also feels like another piece of inviting us away from reactivity, because it leads us towards imagination. And so you speak to the importance of visionary storytelling, that this time asks not just for activism, but also for world making. So what are you open to sharing in regards to your involvement in reworlding visions after the Lahaina fires? And how can listeners learn from that as we try to restory and reworld what's possible for us?
Well, I will, may I share something that is actually more current
Yeah, of
than that?
course.
Okay.
Please.
Right. So I think I would say is that the what is happening right now, right? There's just a tremendous amount of collapse, right? And so it would seem like a paradox to be thinking about the future, but that's exactly what we need to do, which is to say, how do we as peoples create the world that we want? And I believe that the only way you can do that is if you imagine into something different. And so, in both the first book and in the second book, right, I talk about this whole notion of looking into the world of our descendants, right, as far as you can, and to begin to narrate into that world. And so recently, there was a government shutdown, right? And the government shutdown, and at the same time, the SNAP program also began to collapse, and there are people who are really suffering in the communities, very suffering. And one of the groups of people that are in a learning community with me had imagined that in the future that people would be eating more communally, right? That we wouldn't just be sitting in our own homes by ourselves, right? Their story had people meeting and casually and formally in large groups in the community and sharing meals together. And so they said, let's just do that. Let's just do that. And in the few weeks of the month of November, they fed each other in ways in which you couldn't tell who was it that needed food and who was bringing food. So it wasn't like a program, right, where one people are providing food for another. Everyone ate together 6 nights a week. They ended up serving each other over 5,000 meals in this one small community. Okay? They were living what they saw in the future right now. Right? They were just doing it. Okay? And I think of that as a really powerful thing to imagine what it is that we would want in the future at a really granular community level and start living into it right now. Start living to it right now. Right?
Yeah. That's really powerful. This reminder that we don't have to wait for permission or wait to be saved. There are ways that we can connect with one another now to learn what we need and to try to resource that and to imagine what we want and to take steps toward that. Whoever wants to come along in these visions. As we start to wind down our main conversation, I want to invite you to speak on elderhood, because you say that it's not necessarily about age, yet it still takes a lifetime to become an elder. And I know one of your prayers and offerings is, may we be the ancestors our descendants are hoping and praying for. So with this in mind, what are some of the practices, questions, or thresholds that you think we need to journey through or engage in order to become the ancestors that our descendants are praying for?
Okay. We have to expand our notion of love is one of the things, right? And so I think there's a difference between, being just a person who has experience and therefore you're older and you're just passing on that experience. Okay. And there can be a one note associated with that, which is, we used to do things this way. This is the way things should be done. Okay. So coming into elderhood would be to see that, first of all, your experience keeps growing and evolving as your role changes. So your role may, as a young person, be as a student, then you may be an activist, and then you might be a parent or a sibling or an auntie or uncle, right? Your role might be associated with a job as you come into adulthood, or as someone in community who's looked up for certain things. And then as you move into that place where you're preparing for elderhood, to understand that it is about all of that, and also as it impacts today and tomorrow and generations that are not yet to come. You're one of the through lines, the transition through lines. Today, an elder. At the next moment, I will be an ancestor. Okay? Ancestor meaning someone who has passed. Right? As an Indigenous person, I hold the reality that ancestors are still with me. And one of the things that is true to me is sometimes when I'm in a tight spot, I sit and I think about the person who is now an ancestor that I would be asking my question. Okay? And I wait to hear what my ancestor is going to say. And if I'm growing into my elderhood, a thing that is happening is I am answering myself. Right? In other words, I'm building the through line for more wisdom. And that which someone who is older than I am, that I might have gone to for advice, their wisdom is now intertwined with mine and grows with mine. Right? Okay. Coming into elderhood is also about setting aside the petty shit, if I could say that on a podcast, right? And really honing in on what's important. You know, like the things that are not going to serve me anymore, to let go of those things so that I can make more room for the more expansive time that is necessary. As you grow into it, people count on you differently. And a thing that they don't count on is for you to be in a distracted state. Okay? So the human quotient really counts as you come into your elderhood, or you're preparing for that. And I believe that anyone who's in their mid-40s who believes that everyone who in their mid-40s who believes that they're contributing to community should really start preparing for elderhood, knowing that it might take years. Okay? But if when they do that, I lay down a bet that their agency in the in-between time will increase. They'll become more powerful in what it is that they do.
Thank you. One other question arose for me as you were sharing this. You talked earlier about expanding our concepts of love. And what came up for me is I think sometimes or oftentimes people say, where there is good, there's evil. Where there is love, there's hate. Where there's beauty, there's cruelty. So kind of like these things exist as dualities and they require each other as counterweights. And what I've been learning from my kumu olelo is like aloha means so much more than just love. And it encapsulates a lot more that renders it without like a simple word to word replacement in the English language. So like I've been sitting with this question of like, can a deeper form of love exist without a counterweight or an opposing force? And I'd be curious what your thoughts are on that based on your understanding of aloha.
So aloha, right? Aloha is the love comes from understanding and living aloha rather than aloha just being about love. Okay? And that if you are living aloha, if you understand it, then it is the way in which you live and you are and you think and the entirety of your beingness and doingness. When every being is important to every other being for our collective existence. Okay? And when all beings are important to the land and the land important to all beings. Okay? So, if all of this is important for collective existence, then how we need to be with each other would be different. Right? We couldn't cast somebody aside as being irrelevant or, not repair something that is broken between us, because the repair being necessary. And if the repair is only available to one side of a problem, to let go of the anger that you have about that person, about that thing, so you can move on in life and not just be caught in that, right? So there are all kinds of actual behaviors that would arise. That does not mean that evil does not exist in the world. I believe evil does exist. Certainly anger exists, and anger exists in people across the ideological spectrum. Right? Okay. Evil, by the way, exists across the ideological spectrum too. Right? Actual evil, not just the way in which you might identify somebody as being evil because they don't agree with you. Okay? But actual evil. Okay? But rather than being opposites of each other, let's say that all of that exists. Now, how may we live in a more harmonious state when all of that exists? How can we have the harmony actually begin to be cultivated with such abundance and critical mass that what happens is that violence is not a given. Anger is not a given. Not that it will not arise from time to time, but that it is not the prevalent state of affairs. Right? So I would say that right now, part of our collapse is because we have come out of that harmony, out of that. We're no longer like the people, the beings, right, who are the people and the beings that are solving and resolving as we go. Okay? We're the people and the beings who have grievances as we go.
Thank you so much. We are now coming to our final lightning round closing questions. So just the first thing that comes to mind for you. What has been one of the most impactful books you've read lately or publications that you follow?
Oh, well, I actually follow Nautilus, which is a scientific journal. Okay.
What is a motto, mantra, or practice you engage with to stay grounded? And I know there are probably many, but maybe whatever comes to mind for you now.
Breathe.
What is one of your greatest sources of inspiration at the moment?
Food.
Well, Norma, this concludes our conversation. It's been a huge honor to share this time and space with you. I feel like this entire conversation was like a big, deep breath for me, and I'm looking forward to retune into it and to see how it continues to shift and expand me. So thank you so much. As we close off, where can people go to find your books and support your work? And what closing words of wisdom would you like to leave us with?
Well, there's an author's website. It's normawong.com, and they can go and find all different kinds of things that are there, including where they can come to your podcast.
Beautiful. And your closing words of wisdom?
Many thanks, Kamea. Much aloha. Be well. Take care of yourself.